Namaskar, I'm Ashok Vyas. Welcome to Vision of Asia Voice of Community on ITV Gold. This Sunday is a very special Sunday for all fathers, sons, and daughters. Happy Father's Day. And if you are a son celebrating Father's Day or a daughter celebrating Father's Day, it is a right moment for you to think about getting in touch with your father if you are not around him, either through a phone call or Skype or Zoom. Recollect all the good things that has happened in life, express your gratefulness, your love for your father. And there is another important way which helps us in being happy, that is having good health. If we have good immune system, it helps us in overcoming many challenges, including those which are posed by COVID-19. Today is International Day of Yoga, declared by United Nations, initiative of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, accepted by many nations. And now that we observe International Day of Yoga, yoga practices also helps us in developing good immune system. So take advantage of these small practices of pranayam and asanas to stay fit and on the top of your game. So happy Father's Day, happy International Day of Yoga, and now we move towards important stories of this edition. We will have Chivona Newsom's address to South Asian community. We will also hear from Lakshmi Sridharan from SALT on police brutality and anti-blackness. Rise in domestic abuse during COVID-19, that would be part of the conversation with Navneet Bhalla from Manavi with Aditi Lamba. Indian Americans have also expressed their solidarity with George Floyd. There was a march for Black Lives in New Jersey. We'll have a report on that conversation with Congressman Gregory Meek in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd and how he feels about Black Lives Matter movement's direction. We will also conclude today's Vision of Asia with an important conversation in this week with Padma Shri Dr. Sudhir Parik. All this coming up right after these short messages. Stay with us. And now towards first story of today's Vision of Asia Voice of Community, addressed by Shivona Newsom to South Asian community about George Floyd and Black Lives Matter movement in New York City. Take a look.
For you to discuss why you're running for Congress and why Bronx is such an important place for you. You're born and raised here and you want to give back to the community. I just want to know why that's so important, and why did you have to run for Congress specifically?
Well, the polls are actually open right now to tell all of your viewership. They're open until the 21st, and then election day is Tuesday. So if you wanted to avoid the lines, you can totally go into an early voting polling station right now. And to answer your question, the reason why I'm running for Congress, well, as you know, I've been the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Greater New York. I've been doing that for a number of years. And before that, I was a financial advisor, helping Black and brown people create generational wealth, retirement plans, college savings, all of these things. But the reason why I chose to work on a federal level and why I'm choosing to represent the Bronx. Representing the Bronx, number one, that's where I was born and raised. And what people don't know about my district is it's one of the poorest congressional districts in the entire nation. So this is like ground zero for bad health, for lack of adequate housing, for poverty. Our median income here is only $28,000 a year. People in my borough have been suffering, and we've seen no changes. And I'm 35 years old. Yes, I'll say it. I'm 35 years old, but the Bronx is starting to look a little bit shinier, but the poverty here is still dire. It still exists. Now, why I'm running on a federal level? Because that's a great question. A lot of people say, oh, if you really want to help the Bronx, why didn't you run for city council? Why didn't you run for a state level position? Because I feel as if I can change the Bronx, I can change the whole nation. I can eradicate poverty with the policies I'm proposing. What happens here in the laws that I'll now have the ability to change will be everything that I'm fighting for. As before, I would have to go to politicians and ask them, hey, can you pass this law? Can you pass this law? And a lot of them were afraid to do so. They didn't want to disturb the status quo. Now the laws that I'll have the ability to write, they'll affect everyone in this country, from urban cities to rural America, for Black and brown. Today, we just heard amazing news about DACA continuing. But what we really need is a true and clear and easier path to citizenship. It shouldn't be so expensive, immigration. It shouldn't be so hard to become an American. So that's something I'll also have the ability to do. I have the ability to fund proper housing, police reform, criminal justice, women's reproductive rights. These things can all happen with the stroke of a pen, but the people who came before me, they just didn't have the ability to do it, nor did they want to do it.
You know, Shavana, just discussing Bronx as an area, what do you think are the major areas that need concern and that need focus? In terms of some of the issues that you're working on, I have an article here which says that Shavana Newton hopes to be an advocate for universal basic income, Medicare for all, ensuring social security, preserving the rights of immigrants, members of the LGBTQ communities. There are a lot of causes you're working with. What is the most biggest concern for Bronx that you have to focus on with these issues?
It would absolutely be poverty, eradicating poverty, because we see when around the nation and around the world, we see when people are poor, they don't have good health care. They don't have good jobs. They are usually subjected to police brutality. They don't have adequate housing. So my biggest thing is eradicating poverty. It's absolutely economic development. And I've spent time talking to small business owners who look like you and me, and they have a hard time accessing funding that they need to grow their business. And small businesses are the backbone of America. It's a huge part of the American dream. But working and advocating and trying to eradicate poverty, Martin Luther King was working on a guaranteed income. It's the same thing as a universal basic income. Back then, he was asking for $30 million. Now, of course, with the cost of living, it's far greater. By giving every single person over the age of 18 $1,000 a month, and then $500 for each child, that changes things quite drastically. It helps our community. Our community is living, just so you can get a big picture of why I keep talking about extreme poverty, right?
Right.
America's average wages happening here are, the average living wage in America is about $53,000 a year. In the Bronx, it's it's $28,000. We need to change that. We need politicians who care about people. My whole approach is humanity led. Just because you're poor does not mean you don't deserve adequate health care.
Yes, Bronx and certain areas of New York are literally the epicenter of COVID-19 crisis. They have been hit so hard, and due to all of the racial disparity and other things that are happening, Black and brown communities are truly suffering during this crisis. My question to you would be, when we're looking at moving forward, and if you were to become a congressional, representative of this area, what are you going to do differently to make out of this COVID-19 crisis, especially the ones that are suffering so much, the immigrant communities, the Black and brown communities?
Now, I foresaw back in early April, right in the beginning of sheltering in place, that the numbers coming out of my borough were high. Yeah. So on Facebook, because I'm actively engaged with my community, it was tons of memorials happening. People were grieving their loss, their loved ones. And we wrote to Governor Cuomo. We asked for more testing sites. We asked for more facilities for people to live, for more testing facilities. We also started something called the People's Food Program, where as of date, we fed 6,000 people, and a bulk of those people were affected by coronavirus. Now, what you have to think about is, why were the immigrants, why were people in the Bronx so hard hit, and the Bronx became the epicenter of coronavirus? It's because of poverty. It's because we live in areas here in the Bronx where we have something called Asthma Alley, where we don't have adequate food, we have waste management, we have garbage disposals. So if you think back to 2015, when Legionnaire's virus, which is in the water, which is easily treatable, which is easy to get over, it killed people in the Bronx. Pretty much being poor was a predisposition to not being able to fight these viruses. Now, we created green new jobs, greener housing, had more environmental restrictions, had free health care, so people were getting preventative care. God forbid, and next time a virus like this comes around, we will be okay. We'll be fine.
How do you then handle the second surge that we are talking about? What are some of the preparations you have made with your organization and with your team?
Well, right now we are still in preventative mode. We are giving out 100,000 masks to voters and anyone in the community who needs it. We're giving out hand sanitizer. We're letting people know about safety because that's what we can do. As you've seen from the reports coming out of the CDC, it's expanding. So pretty much the virus is going into recession. So people are healing from the virus when there isn't enough time for vaccination. So all we can do is just try to prevent it. And when the virus does hit again, because it's looking like that's going to happen. When the virus does hit again, we just have to be prepared with the same resources that went to wealthy areas where early testing was available, where sheltering in place was easy. We have to have a plan. If the United States, that's why I'm saying we were failed so much. If the federal government and then our state and local municipalities had done preventative care, we would be okay. We would not have become the epicenter. So I think that moving forward fastly and swiftly, and what we're doing it from an organizational standpoint, I hope that we won't lose as many lives to coronavirus.
How do you combat the issue of food insecurity that has truly hit New York?
Well, New York has always had food insecurity. So what we have done is we've grassroots fundraised about $50,000. With that, we are feeding people by the day. We're constantly giving out food. So in addition to me campaigning, I have other members of the team going out feeding food, feeding people. We're doing a large food giveaway tomorrow in celebration of Juneteenth, which is Freedom Day for Black people. And now we're working on partnerships with larger nonprofits to where they can continue to continue delivering food always. And that's just something that needs to be in place. While I go to Washington and I can work on policy and work on better jobs and work on these things. So hopefully we won't need that. But in the interim, what we need to do is make sure we have food readily available for people. It's a shame that in America, one of the richest nations in the whole entire world, that people have to wait on bread lines for food. And I think it's despicable. And I think that any government official who's allowed that to happen to our people, it needs to be voted out.
South Asian Americans leading together. That is the full form of SALT. Lakshmi Sridharan from SALT talked to Aditi Lamba about how George Floyd's killing has brought about increase in awareness related to police brutality and anti-blackness. Take a look.
Thank you so much for being with us on ITV Gold. I hope you're doing well today, and I appreciate you for giving us your time and Saul's perspective on a lot that's happening.
Great. Yes. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to talking with you.
Of course. Lakshmi, just starting off this interview, I have to start off asking you about SALT's stand on George Floyd, but not just George Floyd, but just on the entire conversation of what's happening with the African-American community. I'd like to discuss what your stand is, what SALT's stand is, and how have you sort of understood the situation as a nonprofit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We have been extremely disheartened, of course, about what happened to George Floyd being murdered at the hands of police. And this has been an issue at SALT that we have spoken about in the last several years. It just continues to be part of a cycle of brutality and violence by law enforcement against Black communities in this country. And we believe that at SALT, as non-Black communities of color, it's really important that we understand what's happening here and that we think about our own advocacy around policing, around hate violence, around other issues that impact our community within this context. And we feel like that's very important. We did issue a statement as such, and we will continue to do so and support the efforts to address.
Talking about what has happened, my question to you would be, what do we tell our younger generation and how do we explain the situation to them? They're watching everything, on social media, on news. This entire situation has gone viral. Even Rayshard Brooks' case that just happened this past weekend also has gone super viral because of that. What kind of a conversation should we be having with the younger generation?
Yeah, I think that's so critical. And, as somebody who is a bit older now, I actually feel like I've learned actually so much from the younger generation. In 2015, SALT had a Young Leaders Institute program that was a leadership development cohort that was entirely focused on the theme of confronting anti-Black racism in the South Asian community. And we had 16 young people who are a part of that cohort whose projects we actually hope to share in more detail in the coming weeks. Who did incredible work on addressing anti-Blackness from the perspective of law enforcement, from institutions. Many of them were in college and were addressing that on their campuses, in their community, among other community institutions and religious institutions in the South Asian community. So I actually think that we have a lot to learn from them. And I do know that, all eyes are on this right now. And I think it's really important to continue the conversation, both to rise up to the call from the Black community and from the movement for Black lives to show up now as non-Black people of color, but also to do our work to really examine anti-Blackness within our communities.
Let's talk about this issue of anti-Blackness, Lakshmi, because, this is something that's definitely come up in several conversations in the last few weeks with the case of George Floyd and other cases that have come, consecutively after that. How do you explain this evidence of anti-Blackness in the South Asian American community? And if we were to have a discussion on what that means in a society to have that, and what does that reflect? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult conversation. I know that people have struggled to try to have this conversation within their families, and there are organizations like Equality Labs, like the National Queer South Asian Network, and others who have created spaces to have this dialogue and this conversation. SALT was very happy to co-sponsor the In Defense of South Asians in Defense of Black Lives event that Equality Labs, Drum, and many others organized this past weekend. And I think it's important that we have those types of conversations. I think there's a lot of inroads into the conversation. Our partners at Equality Labs have also taught us it's really important, specifically as Indian Americans, to think about caste and colorism and religious discrimination and how those issues are actually at the root of anti-Blackness within our communities. And so I think, I think many of our communities are still trying to figure out what is the entry point for those conversations, because I know many of us have ended up frustrated with relatives and community members and family and others when trying to have these conversations. But I think more and more resources are being developed by many of these organizations who are on the leading edge of these discussions. So I think it's important that we start there.
How important is it for the South Asian American community to be an ally of the Black community right now?
Sorry, Aditi, I think you froze a little bit.
Did I freeze? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna mark this. There was a little freeze in there. I was just asking, how important do you then think it is for us, South Asian American community or other minority community, to be the ally for the Black community right now, to stand in the causes, to be their support and have the discussion?
Yeah, I think it's extremely critical. As people of color and especially as South Asian communities, we have, I think, greatly benefited from the struggles that the Black community has had to wage in this country. Of course, the most notable being the civil rights movement, which I think it's important to remember was also very, very violently repressed by our government. I think there's a lot of talk about, wanting to see peaceful protests and all of that as a pathway to change. But I think we have to remember that there was so much violence deployed against Black communities during the civil rights struggle. So I think that's really critical to remember. And then I also think as we as a community also consider our reliance on the police and policing for so many of the issues that we also face in our community, it's important for us to interrogate that and really think about how we're relying on racist institutions.
Just discussing more on that, Lakshmi, I'd like to discuss systemic racism, another huge topic that has come out, in the front for discussion the last couple of weeks, but also its relation to police brutality. What are your comments on it? And then what do you also have to say about the fact that there have been over 1,000 cases since 2015 of police brutality, against African-American community? In that sense, how important is it for us to understand that and to also understand the relation between the two?
Yeah, I think it's so great to hear in the mainstream discourse people talking about systemic and institutionalized racism, because I don't think that's really been the case before. A lot of times when these cases happen, it's always seen as, oh, that was one bad cop, there's just a few bad apples in the system. But I think what's really happening now is that the mainstream, which people in the movement have been saying for a very long time, are now realizing that the entire system is corrupt to its core, is rotten to its core. And I think that's a really important lesson that's coming out now. Many years ago in 2013, Malcolm X grassroots movement put out a report detailing how they were able to find that every 28 hours a Black man was killed by a police officer, a security guard, or a self-appointed vigilante. And so I think this is, it's really important that this data is being collected and that we understand the connection between systemic racist institutions, and that policing is one of many of those institutions.
You're watching Vision of Asia, Voice of Community on ITV Gold. This program comes to you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 8 p.m. on ITV Gold, and a special weekly edition of Vision of Asia comes to you on ITV Gold every Sunday at 11 a.m., where we are meeting right now. We appreciate your encouraging response. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these short messages. Indian Americans have also expressed their solidarity with Black Lives Movement. There was a march organized at New Jersey to express this solidarity. Here's a report.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No Lord! Lord! Breonna! Taylor! Breonna! Taylor! Breonna! Taylor! Breonna! Taylor! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No racist! Police! No racist! Police! No racist! Police! No racist! Police!
Well, we just wanted to organize this march and vigil for the Black lives that have been lost due to police brutality and just white violence. The Edison community is majorly an Indian and South Asian community, and this was the best way to show our solidarity.
The reason why I'm here today is to show support for the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests. It's extremely important, one, as a society, but what most people don't realize is that it happens to be happening right here on Oak Tree Road. And Oak Tree Road, specifically for this movement, is very historical. If you go back to Edison's history and you go back 10, 15, 20 years, and Edison, use of force issues related to the police department is something that we as a community also faced. It's something that we dealt with and overcame successfully. The reason why this is so important is because now we can actually say that, one, Edison itself is a very diverse community. We have every single demographic present, every single economic demographic present, and we've overcame use of force issues specifically in our town. It's important to show solidarity that we should be a model not just for other towns neighboring, but also America. We have the right, everyone should be heard, everyone should be protected, and we should live and stand by one community.
When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! No justice? No peace! No justice? No peace! No justice? No peace! No justice? No peace! Sandra! Blair! Sandra! Blair! Sandra! Blair! Blair!
Hello, my name is Samuel Marshall, and I've lived in Edison, New Jersey for most of my life, and I'm here on Oak Tree Road in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and to help continue the fight for justice that African Americans across the country have been fighting for the past few weeks now. But really, what I definitely want to call attention to is that it's a fight for justice that's been going on for definitely more than the past 2 weeks. It's really been a fight that's been over 400 years long. And more than anything else, I just want to be here to honor and pay respect to all the different people who have come before me to allow me the freedom and opportunity to stand here today and to honor their memory, both those like George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, whose lives were taken by systematic police violence, and also those whose names you're not allowed to know, those who died on the Middle Passage on the way to this country, those who died fighting for their right to vote, for their right to fair treatment throughout the society.
Black lives matter! 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 Black lives matter!
So I wanted to say that it's really important to support Black Lives Matter because everyone should be treated equally and no one should be considered less.
No one should have to go through this again, and I think it's really important that everyone should take at least some time of their day to show some support and come to these protests.
Yeah, if you can't protest, there are many other ways you can sign petitions, so just try to do your best.
Hi, we're trying to raise awareness about the rampant systemic racism in this country. It's gone way too far. Black people have been dealing with this crap for 400 years now. Since 1619 to 2020, it's getting ridiculous. Abolish the police and abolish prisons. Thank you.
Your name?
Oh, my name's Layla.
Spell.
This community is the Black Wall Street of the Indian community. You know what I mean? This is their Tulsa. This is what has become about because of the civil rights movement. You know,
we've experienced racism here for a very long time because before that, this used to be a community filled with Italians, and we kind of took over.
Yeah, and there were a lot of white supremacists in this town before, you know, the Indian community came over. Yeah, they did. And, you know, it's a good thing, though, in my opinion. You know, the town's booming. Property values have increased dramatically. You know, the school system's now top 25 in the state.
J.B. Stevens is one of the best schools in the country.
Yep. And it's all because, really, of the Indian Asian community. And that's something that needs to be said.
And I'm very proud to be from Oak Tree Road today because, as we can see, they all stand with every community. We're always open to equality for all, especially Black Lives Matter, because that's something we really are stressing today.
We really condemn what has happened for the blacks, and we want the equal treatment for black and white people in America, because America is for everyone, and it is an immigrant country, so it should be for all. Thank you.
Black Lives Matter is not a moment, it is a movement. Growing up black is not a temporary thing. You don't get to choose when you wish to be black. Your skin always shows it. Growing up black is having to be everyone's advocate because you know what it feels like to be alienated, but people rarely being yours in return. Growing up black is having to relearn all the history in your textbook because writers thought it was more fit to say that Rosa Parks was tired than to say that the civil rights bus movement was preordained, organized, and planned. Growing up black is walking into a store and the store owner following you around because they think you're going to steal. Growing up as a black woman is having to constantly monitor your hairstyles out of fear that someone else will deem your fro unprofessional. Growing up black is tiring. If you're tired of wearing your mask that restricts you every day, then you could not imagine the life of wearing a permanently placed mask forced on you to police you and keep you silently in line. That is what growing up black feels like. Growing up black is not a temporary thing, and neither is the respect that black lives deserve. Black lives will matter now, forever, and again in the afterlife. With that being said, it is not enough for you to fight yesterday. You must advocate for us every day, as we must wake up every day and fight for ourselves, whether we want to or not. As a reminder, it is not enough to not be racist. We need you to be anti-racist.
I know that's right.
We need you to advocate for us the way that you would want for yourselves. If this moment in time makes you uncomfortable, good. Being here today is a choice. Every day of my life is filled with uncomfortable experiences, and I do not get to check out and simply give a disregard the way that they do the black lives in this country.
Yeah!
Black Lives Matter is not a chant, it is a lifestyle.
Congressman Gregory Meeks himself from the black community felt the pinch, pain, anger, anguish of the killing of George Floyd on 25th June. He talked to us about his reaction to this movement, about reviving after COVID-19 as a nation, and the direction of Black Lives Movement. Here are few excerpts from that conversation. When we see each other, we feel good, and there is a sense of joy, and that brings smile. But at the back of our mind, we are still in the middle of the process of opening up. So, Congressman Gregory Meek, I would seek your first-hand analysis of when COVID-19 started unfolding to where we are now. You are satisfied with the journey that we have taken, or you would have liked to see it happen differently?
Well, of course, I would like to have seen it happen differently. Too many Americans, too many people have lost their lives, money, some of which I believe could have been saved. I think that we were slow on what the proper things to do. Just if you go back and look at some of the videotape, particularly of what was said by the President of the United States, he said that he had it under control. He said that it was going to magically go away, that he didn't believe that it was going to be as bad in the United States as it had in places. We didn't start. We started social distancing very late. We started focusing on wearing masks very late. And so we allowed the virus to spread much too fast. We were over impacted. I know in my congressional district, there was a time there for about a 2.5 week period of time. All of our hospitals was overrun. Remember, we didn't have enough PPE and respirators. I've never seen a time like that before. I think that some of it, had we been prepared, could have been avoided. No, I think that there's a lot that could have been done and should have been done much earlier to prevent the pandemic to spread as rapidly and as ferociously as it in fact did. I thank the governor of the state of New York, who, because there was no federal direction, there was no national direction on which way to go. I can recall when you talk about PPE, states was fighting against or competing against states to get their the PPEs, and of course, New York City was the epicenter of the coronavirus. But that being said, now we've come a long way. I think Governor Cuomo, by and large, had a lot of it right. He put together a program that has, locking the city and the state down, telling folks mandatory stay at home. Unless you were an emergency worker or an essential worker, and then public transportation shut down, having to wear a mask. He was about it every day, communicating the facts as he received them from the doctors and scientists, and didn't ignore what they said, as the president had done initially. He listened to what they said. And so we're at the point now, because back then, we were all real worried how long before we could even get to phase 1 of reopening. But because of the governor and because of the people of the state of New York listening by and large, we're able to go to phase 1 starting yesterday. And the number of deaths are down almost to single digits. The number of new people being hospitalized is minimal. Hospitals are back to what's the new normal. And so we'll keep our fingers crossed. We know that the virus is still out there. We still got to abide by the social distancing and making sure that you wear a mask and washing your hands on a consistent basis. We're learning more about this virus. Things still change as we learn more. So I'm hopeful that we'll get past phase 1 and we'll move on to phase 2, all the while we're trying to discover and find a vaccine that can be utilized so that we can then get back to normal. But I'll take a new normal of having individual social distance, wearing a mask, and to the degree that restaurants and other things are open on the outside with at 50% or 25% capacity, moving up to 50. That's progress. So I'll take the progress. So I think we are progressing along.
Wonderful. And now moving towards the other important concerns about which also Governor of New York has also made another parallel conversation with his address every day. regarding COVID-19, and that relates to the unfortunate killing. 25th June became a black day. So moving away from such incidents has been a concern of each and everyone, but the way things should move and the way the protests have unfolded, not just in the United States of America, but I would say in various parts of the world. So, how do you see this Black Lives Matter movement in with particular reference of what happened on 25th June?
Well, you know, it's very important to me. I've lived this life as a black man all of my life, and I've dealt with the problem of racism all of my life here in the United States, particularly as it pertains to treatment of police to the black community. And to see time and again individuals who have been brutalized, and in this case, Mr. Floyd murdered at the hands of the police, shouting he can't breathe. We saw that in Staten Island, New York, with Eric Gardner. I've seen it when police officers have shot Amadou Diallo with over 40 bullets. Same with Sean Bell in my native Queens. So we've seen it over and over again. And that's disheartening and at times very angering to me. So I was very disheartened and angered about what I've seen too often during my lifetime. But I also have seen hope in this when I look in the streets and see the people that are demonstrating, young and old, black, white, brown, yellow, and red, everybody, whether you're Asian, whether you're white, whether you're African American, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're Native American, everybody's out on the streets saying enough is enough. And we see the disparities in these communities. And it seems as though that finally the nation is hearing the cry of individuals that have been making this cry for a long time. So, you know, I'm a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, and we've been putting out budgets for all of the 22 years that I'm in Congress, talking about how we need to change policing and how we need to end certain disparities. And we saw that in the healthcare business. And it seemed to have gone upon deaf ears. But now it seems as though the ears are listening and the eyes are seeing. So we came out yesterday with a very important bill that we brought out yesterday that we will be working on. And hopefully there will be hearings on it this week, markup on it, and hopefully we'll vote on it within the next 2 weeks in the United States House of Representatives. So I come out, you know, still with anger at times, but with hope also that we're going to make a difference this time and try to change the course of this nation in regards to Black lives.
In this week with Padma Shri Dr. Sudhir Parikh, we touched upon various issues, beginning with confrontation between India and China on the border. So let us begin with the Sino-India conflict and 20 soldiers martyred, and situation is not very clear. How do you look at these developments?
Well, I mean, I'm sure government is on the top of it, under control of it. And this conflict, I mean, it is a small conflict yet right now, but I think it's a serious conflict because there is no reason why there should be a conflict, right? So I'm sure government is well aware of it, and government is letting us know whatever we are supposed to know as a people of Republic of India.
That is true, and let me read the tweet of Home Minister Rajnath Singh ji. He said, "The loss of soldiers in Galwan is deeply disturbing and painful. Our soldiers displayed exemplary courage and valor in the line of duty and sacrificed their lives in the highest tradition of the Indian Army." And Dr. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also in his address said that their sacrifice will not go in vain. But when you translate these words into actual action, which potentially is possible on the part of India, while Chinese have entered in the Indian territory. How do you see possible developments in near future?
Well, I think this kind of conflict, the best way to resolve is a diplomatic way. And I'm sure our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Defense and PMOs, they all are in a very tireless and round-the-clock negotiation with the counterpart of China. And somehow they should resolve this thing, and hopefully this should not end up going into the United Nations or third-party involvement beyond the bilateral conflict.
Yeah, like China and India both are kind of more powerful than what they were earlier. But parallel to this conflict, the COVID-19 and this virus, there is a resurgence in China as well as in India. How do you see the timing of this conflict? Is there something which hypothetically is it's not visible and might be underneath the kind of developments that we see on the border?
Well, I mean, timing is unfortunate, and timing usually this kind of here obviously China is aggressor, and not they do not have good intention, and a person, I mean, country who does not have good intention, they always take advantage of kind of sensitive timing for the opposite party. So that's why I mean, because of this COVID pandemic, India has that pandemic is going very kind of very worrisome. At that time, China is taking undue advantage of India and doing all this mischief.
So now that you're talking about the role of active and alert opposition, on the one hand, we heard from Congress leader Sonia Gandhi expressing her full support to the government in this situation. And at the same time, there are questions being raised, particularly Rahul Gandhi said today, when there is so much anger in the country over Chinese intrusion into Indian border, the Prime Minister should come out and tell the truth on how the Chinese occupied the Indian territory, why brave soldiers were martyred, and what is current situation along the LAC. Do you think pressurizing or seeking details from government is natural in a democracy? Or do you see Congress' role is not at par with what you would expect them to be taking?
Well, I mean, this morning, I think, or evening time, India time, Prime Minister did address the nation regarding this Sino-India conflict, and I'm sure he gave a complete overview of what's going on, where we stand, and where China stands, and where the world stands, or world opinion stands on this. And I think he tried to give good overview. But in democracy also, I think opposition has right, and opposition should keep reminding party in the power to give the correct, or not correct, but what I say is a overview of the situation time to time, because people of India has right to know, unless there is some sensitive issues or part, a technique or part where government cannot share with the because of national security, that is fine. But overall view should be given to the public.
So on the whole, people always have been critical of Prime Minister Narendra Modi for not taking questions from the press. And that continues in this context. But let's move towards the parallel track of the problem or situation related to COVID-19. And unfortunately, what we see now is there are many more COVID-19, this virus affected people in India, and that number is growing. And it is kind of apparent that India is not in a position to handle the number of deaths. And so overall on this front, how do you see, and is there any potential role that sitting here some of the Indian American doctors can play?
Well, I mean, I think if you recall, I predicted this 2-3 weeks ago that when everybody was thought that in India, because of the very strict lockdown, everything is under well control, but that was false perception, because you can see now that whole situation is exploded, and that's a kind of a normal expected, in a sense that when people come out and the people, I mean, government do more testing, is bound to create this kind of explosion and more cases. And during lockdown, I'm sure government has done its best to prepare a hospital, number of beds, and number of doctors, number of healthcare workers, and so forth. But it looks like because of the sheer population of the India, the thick, crowded living condition, and also certain kind of lack of education, lack of information or education, this number of cases are going out of hand. And not only that, but I think it looks like is that government does not have enough number of beds or facility, or government should do a little more than what they are doing, and make sure that all the private hospitals take part into this COVID crisis. Yep. And from here, what we can do as a doctor or as a healthcare person, I think the doctors from here or nurses, those who are of Indian origin, should volunteer themselves, go back to India and give some service for next 2-3 weeks, and that will be very helpful to India.
Indeed, talking about what could be helpful in terms of economic revival of India, do you see the roadmap is laid out and shared by Indian government? And any advice, if you may have at this point, for Indian Finance Minister or Indian Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, roadmap is relatively is very good, and I think it's on the track. But the only thing is, as a lot of other economists voice their opinion, saying that to any economy to be revived, there is there should be manufacturing, production. So government has given a lot of money to corporations there, but at the same time, government should give quite a bit money, quite a bit support or subsidy to the people of India, because by supplying the goods is not good enough. But you need a supplier and a consumer to utilize those goods, and then economy can be revived successfully.
Absolutely. And continuing with the part reference of economy with America, and President Trump working towards new equation with World Trade Organization. In fact, he has been very critical and has blamed that America is not treated fairly by this organization, and he has called for a reset button. How do you look at this development and the ideas or actions on the part of President Trump?
I think I agree with the President Trump on this issue, because there need to be reset the button for world trade, because I think USA has capability, facility, and manpower to do what USA used to do in 20 years ago or 25, 30 years ago, before World Trade Act, that we can manufacture our supply right from scratch to everything and anything. So you don't have to be dependent on the foreign country for supply. And if you want to get the cheaper manpower in foreign countries, then foreign country has to also abide by, or American corporation who manufactures in the foreign country should pay some extra tariff on that, because that's the only way to revive the economy.
Absolutely, and more details next time. But before we wind up today's session, I would like us to focus back on the current development related to COVID-19. And fortunately, as New Yorkers are working towards reopening, things are much better in tri-state area than many other states. So, what additional or sustained precaution you would like to recommend?
Well, I mean, as we repeat every week, that even though in New York, New Jersey area, luckily the COVID is under well control, the incidence percentage of the infection, new infection is much, much less. Number of admissions are less, number of deaths are much less. But in order to continue this thing, we must not forget that the virus is still around, is not gone away. So we must wear the mask to protect yourself and protect others in the public. Wash your hand all frequently. And the third thing is keep the social distance. If you do this, even if you continue to come out and work on workplace, then I think probably we can win this virus crisis, and hopefully the vaccine should be here by end of the year, and some new medical treatment will be here before that. And if it comes, then I think people will feel more confident and more mentally will accept the coming out and be part of the normal life.
I appreciate that, and as we request you to share your final thoughts on today's show, I also want you to tell us, based on your personal interaction with once you are back in your clinic or you are interacting with other physicians. So, how is the spirit in terms of revival of the new normal?
Well, I mean, luckily I'm in the field where it's a medical field, and luckily always medical field bounce back right away. So as soon as we open up ourselves 100%, we our census, means number of patients who comes to visit us, it went back to pre-COVID time in 1 week time, or 1 or 2 weeks, in 1 or 2 weeks time. So because that's advantage we have, because all the patients were really looking for some medical help. They were not coming out because of the lockdown. And now but of course we have to maintain our offices. We have to disinfect our waiting room, disinfect our exam room after each patient. And then we make sure that our appointment schedule is such that we don't let waiting room or office get crowded. And all the doctors and nurses, everyone wears all the protective mask and gas. And I think everything, as far as medicine is concerned, I think most of the doctors are back to normal.
And your final thoughts?
Well, as I say that all the time, every week, that again, viruses is down, rate of infection is down, hospital admission is down, number of deaths are down, but don't think that viruses are gone away or disappeared. So please remember, when you are out, when you are at work, when you are at in the community, make sure that you don't join the crowded situation. Keep the mask on when you're in public. Keep the personal hygiene aggressively, and keep the distance. And I think that's a great formula, and nothing to worry about otherwise. So good luck, and God bless America, God bless India, and we'll see you next week. Please join us. Thank you.
And now time to say goodbye from today's Vision of Asia Voice of Community. But before we take your leave, a good time to remember Happy Father's Day and Happy International Day of Yoga. Do join us on our Facebook page of ITV Gold. Subscribe to ITV Gold's YouTube channel and keep writing events at itvgold.com. We appreciate your encouraging response. We wish you good health. Take care. This is Ashok Vyas. Namaste.